Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to everybody who is here in person in the cathedral, or if you're joining us online, either now or later in the day. We're so glad you're here. My name is B.J. Owens. I'm the Dean of Trinity Cathedral in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. And welcome for our first TrinityForum of the year, and actually the first time that we've done this in person in several years. So this is really special and exciting, and a great honor to have DanMoulthrop with us.
Thank you.
Who is no stranger to forums, as the leader of the City Club Forum as well. Dan, I'm sure you know him well. Dan is the CEO of the City Club of Cleveland. City Club is one of the nation's greatest free speech forums. It was founded in 1912. Trinity was built in we've been around for 200 years, but this space was built in 1907. So from that same cultural moment, I think,
yes,
in many ways. Dan became the CEO of City Club in 2013, after many years as a member, volunteer, and frequent forum moderator. Prior to joining the City Club, he was co-founder of the City Commons, a pioneer in the field of social media for civic good. He was a former host of 90.3 WCPN Sound of Ideas and co-author of the best-selling book Teachers Have It Easy, The Big Sacrifices and Small Salaries of America's Teachers, which was the basis of the 2011 documentary American Teacher. He's an award-winning journalist, a former high school teacher, a graduate of UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, and as we just learned talking beforehand, he and I were both in New York City for pretty much the same overlapping period of time, just before I left a few months before the September 11th attacks.
Yeah, I left a couple years before.
Yeah, so pretty much also in kind of a similar moment.
Yes.
But Dan is here to talk about the Cleveland mayoral election, which is coming up. The primary is just in 2 days, on Tuesday. So we will say it now and say it many times. If you are eligible to vote here in Cleveland, we hope you will vote. We're talking about the Cleveland Mayoral Olympics.
Mayoral Olympics. It is.
It kind of is.
It is the Mayoral Olympics.
But of course, wherever you are, we really hope you will participate and carry out your responsibility and your opportunity to vote.
I feel like we should also say that one of my favorite podcasts is the NPR Politics podcast, and they always say, like, this is being recorded at like this certain time. So we're on Sunday, September 12th. Right. By the time you watch this, things will likely have changed.
That's exactly right. We hope you will watch this in the next 48 hours, because that's the critical moment. And we hope that you will, rather than an altar call, you will step out and go to, is it Board of Elections, or is it kind of all over the place?
Yeah, well, I mean, at this point, you may as well just wait till Tuesday, because it'll be right in your neighborhood. But the thing is, like, there really aren't that many places voting on Tuesday. Cleveland is the big place. Cleveland Heights is the other place that has a primary. And then there are a couple of other, I think Solon and a few other communities, but not a lot of communities. In the general election, there'll be some other things, but not a lot of communities have a primary.
Okay.
But this mayoral primary, BJ, you're right. I mean, like, this is the big one for Cleveland, the first big one in 16 years.
Right. This will be the first time we have a mayor other than Frank Jackson since 2005.
Yeah.
And we're here to talk about that election, and we'll name the candidates. But I should probably note, as
is this a test?
This is probably, oh dear. Well, I wrote them down.
No, I could do it.
Without
I could do
notes.
it. Yeah.
I think it's also helpful to remind folks that we are not here to endorse candidates.
Absolutely
and
not.
There's a very specific reason for that, and that's that Dan and I both like our jobs very much, and it's wildly inappropriate for us to do that. I always like to talk a little bit about why that is, right? Whether, broadly speaking, for us it's separation of church and state, but it's really about free speech, and speech is better when the church doesn't get involved telling people what they should think, how they should vote. The church is better off when we're not telling people what they should think, how they should vote.
Well, and in a way that's not dissimilar at all. The City Club does not do advocacy. We get accused of doing advocacy, but we really don't. We never have. Our creed there's a line in the creed that has been with us since 1916. It was written by Ralph Hayes. And there's a line in the creed that sticks with me. It's not quite like the Nicene Creed, but it's the line that resonates most strongly with me is this one: I have no axe to grind, no logs to roll. My abode shall be the rendezvous of strong but open-minded individuals, and my watchword shall be information, not reformation. So we don't advocate for reforms, and we don't pick winners. We don't advocate for specific people or candidates. We provide the platform, and we advocate. The one thing we advocate for is civic engagement from everybody by all sides. And if you'll allow me a historical footnote, when the City Club movement started, and like we weren't one of the first, we were one of the last to start, but when the City Club movement started, most of them were research and advocacy organizations.
Really?
And the City Club of Cleveland chose not to do that. Our founders, Newton D. Baker, Carl Friebelin, all of these wonderful men who created the City Club, and it was a men's thing at the time, and women they changed the bylaws in 1972, but there had been a women's City Club as well. But they chose not to create an advocacy organization, I think for two reasons, I believe. One is we had a lot of advocacy organizations. Mm-hmm. We had the Center for Community Solutions. We had the Citizens League and other organizations like that. And the other reason is that when you do advocacy, you inevitably alienate people who disagree with you. Mm-hmm. And so we don't do that. And as the leader of these sorts of institutions, it's really in everybody's best interest that we keep our private opinions private.
How do you do that as the fever pitch around whatever the issue, whatever the urgency becomes, whether you're talking about at a local level or a national level? How do you navigate those waters as there becomes a greater express need to take a side? Do that?
Well, it's hard. I mean, like particularly over, I'm not going to get into, with the mayor's race, it's not that hard to not pick a side because
right.
we convene the primary debates, and you can still watch them online at cityclub.org or IdeaStream's website. But, it's very clear, like the most important role we can play is in providing a neutral platform and a very high quality debate. So being committed to that project is very, it inspires me, and it's not, that part isn't hard. What was more difficult was like a year ago, 2 years ago, being committed to democracy and not pick and sort of figuring out, okay, what is my lane? Because civic engagement was so important in 2019 and 2020, and it was very clear that not everybody was equally committed to the project of democracy and the project of civic engagement, and that some were more interested in their power rather than the power of the people. And so it was very much about, for us and for me personally as a sort of civic leader of sorts, to stake that out and to be very clear, this is what I believe in. I believe in democracy. And frankly, like, had a Democratic election led to the re-election of Donald Trump, I would have, figured out a way to live through that too. He's not my favorite guy at all. But democracy and the democratic involvement is something that's just so important to us at the City Club, so important to me personally.
Right.
And also I happen to know so important to the Episcopal Church, as you and I were talking about. We partnered with the National Cathedral last year on a project, and their involvement, the Bishop Curry's involvement, the Reverend Canon Kelly Brown Douglas's involvement was crucial to the success. It was beautiful.
I love any opportunity I have to talk about them and to talk about Bishop Curry, because we can look to him as someone who does a really powerful job of creating a container that everyone of good intention and goodwill can walk into and see themselves in it.
Yeah.
But I also, having listened carefully to his sermons over these many years, I always read Bishop Curry's statements. Go to the second paragraph, second line, and you'll see that there's a lot more of an edge to it than you picked up on the first one.
Yeah.
And it's a gifted thing because it allows everyone to still remain in that space. Mm-hmm. And he also, I think this is probably a difference. And we of course do have space to take up issues. There are certain things where sides is not the right word, but we certainly have perspectives where we say are an expression of our values. Mm-hmm. But that stops when we talk about actual candidates.
Yeah.
Not only is that tax law, believe it or not, which could make for an interesting forum too, but that's won't be for today.
Not my realm of expertise.
Right. We do not talk specifically about endorsing candidates. But today, let's talk about the race that we're in right now.
Yes.
And let's talk about why this is so urgent. And as we talked before, I am still new-ish to Cleveland. I'm 2.5 years. I think, how many years do you have to be before you're sort of a local person? Maybe 12, 14, right? At least, right? I like to ask folks who join me for the forum, if there is something I need to have on my bookshelf that is dog-eared, well-read, and well-noted, what would you suggest I add to that shelf?
So there's an encyclopedia of Cleveland history that's a very useful book, a reference book to keep on hand that John Grabowski wrote probably in the 90s. It hasn't been updated. That's sort of a problem. But there's a lot of similar information online now.
Right.
A lot of it is online, but it's a very useful.
Is that the book with lots of essays?
There's a bunch of these sorts of things, but honestly, I knew you were going to ask me that, and I was thinking, like, I don't really have a Cleveland-centric book, but I'm less interested in the specifics of Cleveland politics and the history of that, because I've lived a lot of it since moving here in 2005. I'm really interested in Ohio politics, and there's a book that David Giffords wrote a few years ago called Barnstorming Ohio, which it really does travel throughout the state and helps you understand the politics, and in particular, you grab it now and it will help you understand the statewide races that are about to unfold in the next 12 months.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. Not only did I move from another place to Cleveland, I'm from North Carolina, and learning the statewide politics, learning how much that becomes the lens. You can't understand the cities unless you understand the whole state.
Oh, well, the state, Cleveland, like most places in America, right? The urban areas are bubbles and sort of have a different way that they engage with the statewide politics. And so, anyway, I recommend that book. And David Giffords lives in Akron. He's a great guy. He can come and talk next year.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I just voluntold him.
Great. So join us this time next year for a forum with David Giffords. So this mayor election is upon us, or the primary is upon us. I'll go ahead and name the candidates: Justin Bibb, Ross DeBello, Bashir Jones, Kevin Kelly, Dennis Kucinich, Zach Reed, and Sandra Williams. If you're looking for a really great initial primer, you can watch the 2 City Club debates that are available online. These are wonderful opportunities to get into certainly the issues, to learn about the candidates, see how they respond. I shared with you earlier something that was really wonderful about those forums was you hear directly from residents of Cleveland asking questions about what's on their mind, which, having seen so many debates where there's just a lot of stumping and posturing, it's really good to hear the voices of people asking what's really important to them.
Thank you.
So here we are in this moment. What's important about this particular mayoral election? This is the most exciting. I moved here in 2005 when the summer that Frank Jackson was running against Jane Campbell, and there were about 6 or 7 other candidates in the race. Jane Campbell was a one-term mayor at the time, the first woman to be mayor of the city of Cleveland. Frank Jackson was council president. And it was pretty clear very early on that these were the candidates who would emerge from the primary, and that this was the race. And Jane Campbell had her tenure in office didn't fulfill quite the promise of her campaign. I think that's probably accurate to say. But I had just arrived, so I was trying to get my bearings. And that summer, I actually moderated the City Club's debate. I had just gotten here from J School, and the City Club invited me to moderate the primary debate, and it was the first time I'd ever moderated anything in my life. And jumping right in.
And I loved it, and that's basically why I have the job that I have today, because I had so much fun and enjoyed that so much, and I was hooked. And so whenever any opportunity to work with the City Club again came up, I would say yes. Today we have, with the mayor not running for re-election, that meant that suddenly all of these candidates, all of these people who otherwise might not have gotten in, Kevin Kelly never would have run against Mayor Jackson. Right? Sandra Williams probably wouldn't have run against Mayor Jackson. Justin Bibb might have, but he's young enough that he might have said, let me wait another 4 years. That Mayor Jackson isn't running again just made it possible for people to imagine themselves in that role. he has dominated that role for so long that and really defined it in a certain way.
Right.
What you have right now among all of these candidates are really different, like competing visions for what a city hall could be and what the mayor's office could actually accomplish and how the mayor's office could behave in relation to the city. And it's very different from the way Mayor Jackson has led. Mayor Jackson has been an incredible steward of public finances, of kind of 2008, BJ, was a moment when Cleveland was in the news, the national news all the time, as one of the places that was referred to as ground zero for the recession and ground zero for the foreclosure crisis. Detroit declared bankruptcy. Other cities were declaring bankruptcy. Cleveland never did. Cleveland didn't actually lay anybody off. The city of Cleveland made it through the recession without laying anybody off because Frank Jackson was basically a budgetary genius. Now, say what you will about Frank Jackson and vision or his ability to engage with the public or things like that. His strengths really lied in the administration of the city. And but it's been a somewhat insular and very sort of tightly held administration, and there hasn't been a ton of public engagement. The mayor's not known for being out in public a lot, and that is one thing that's going to change dramatically. No matter who wins, you're going to feel a real difference in the way that the mayor's office engages with the community.
What then is, you describe a fiscally well-run city navigating through very challenging times and not exactly starting 15 years ago in the driver's seat in many ways.
Right.
What then is so urgent about this moment?
Well, I mean, like we're all wearing masks, right? So the response to the COVID pandemic is one.
Right.
Racial equity is another. Cleveland is still under a consent decree with the Division of Police, and we almost forget that we are the city with the police department that chased two unarmed people through the streets, along the highways, into East Cleveland, and then shot the car 137 times. Melissa Williams and Timothy Russell are also the city of Tanisha Anderson and Tamir Rice and others. That is a huge issue. Right. That's a massively important issue. And while there was a consent decree in the early 2000s during the Campbell administration, this one right now is still deeply important. And it connects to, there's a different kind of energy around criminal justice reform that you mentioned the Greater Cleveland congregations before and the volunteers who are involved there. There's a really different kind of energy around criminal justice reform right now. And with the rebuilding of a new justice center for Cuyahoga County, there are huge questions there about what is possible and whether you're going to design a new justice center for the kind of criminal justice system that we aspire to create, or whether it's going to be designed to extend the status quo. Public education is another exceptionally urgent issue. We've got the State of the Schools coming up, and it's been roughly 10 years of the Cleveland Transformation Plan, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to do there. And COVID has laid bare all sorts of issues and inequities that we continue to face. This is a mayorally controlled school board.
Okay.
So the mayor appoints the school board, which is a really significant thing. And then economic development. Cleveland, there are a small number of large cities in Ohio that gain population according to the most recent census. Lorain, Ohio is one of them, which is very close by, but it was a really incremental change. Columbus gained a considerable amount of population.
Cincinnati did as well, didn't it?
Cincinnati a little bit. Cleveland has continued to lose population.
Right.
The problem with that isn't that we lose city council members. That's not the problem with that. The problem with that is that we edge closer to becoming Youngstown. That we, so turning around, doing the economic development turnaround, is important for all sorts of reasons, because jobs, as Father Greg Boyle says, nothing stops a bullet like a job. Job creation and workforce development is really key to so much of what troubles us.
Well, and you talked about one lever of power that the Cleveland mayor has, which is the school board. In any situation, whether it's the city or when there's an executive responsibility, there are certain levers of power that person has.
Yeah.
Some of that is probably just intrinsic to being a mayor, whether it's a bully pulpit, the ability to speak publicly to folks. But then every city-state kind of has its own culture in terms of what a mayor can do and cannot do. What are some things that are specific to how Cleveland politics are, both structurally and culturally, that give a mayor power or prevent them from having it?
So structurally, the mayor has a huge amount of power, much of which has gone underutilized in the last 16 years, I would argue. Or perhaps not used as I would use them. I mean, let's be honest. But the
If you were running things, Dan, go on.
No, in all seriousness, so appointing the school board is one thing, but the mayor has the ability to, the mayor makes appointments all over the place. So it's not just the mayor's cabinet, the economic development director, the chief of staff, the city planning commission, all of that. But the planning commission itself is one. The mayor also appoints a majority of the members to NOACA, our metropolitan planning organization, which is a giant funnel for federal transportation funds. The mayor appoints people to the board of the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority. These mayoral appointments are all over the place, and these people then function as kind of a oversight, but also the ability to execute on vision or ensure that vision is executed. Installing more than just using these appointments as more than just patronage is super important.
And Cleveland has a long history of those patronage appointments.
There can be that, but this is a tremendous amount of power that the mayor has. Culturally, the mayor has a huge ability, and this is definitely untapped and underutilized, to leverage the bully pulpit. There's a convening power that comes with the mayor's office that is not used very often. Our city is dying for a leader in City Hall who will reach out beyond City Hall to the county executive, to business leadership, to clerical leadership, to education leadership, to civic leadership, to really build an agenda that we can all get behind. And the mayor, that hasn't been a role that Mayor Jackson has taken on for himself. Imagine, right, if the mayor called you and called other clerical leaders and said, we're going to have breakfast in the Red Room in 2 weeks. I want to talk to you about what we can all do together, right? You would show up.
Absolutely.
Right? And but that hasn't happened. And despite the existence of Greater Cleveland congregations and the interests of lots of people who don't participate in Greater Cleveland congregations, right? So there is a tremendous amount of power there that has not been exercised in a while. I think probably hasn't been exercised effectively since the Mike White era.
And I would observe, coming in as a relatively new Clevelander, is that the civic culture is remarkable here. There's just a rich bench of people and organizations and communities that want to be a part of change and want to be a part of building things up. And there are such rich assets that make this city a great place. But there's a drag on it sometimes. It's very difficult to gain momentum. And I'm curious about why that is. I mean, what I hear from you is that being able to channel that both through effective appointing and staffing and having representatives carrying a vision forward who can both talk about it, but also build the networks and execute it. That's going to be really important. But also being able to have that convening power and living up to that seems really important. What other barriers are there to that kind of civic momentum creating the wave that can happen or we hope can happen.
You know, there's a thing that happens in City Hall, and I think it happens in a lot of city halls and always has across the world, frankly, where like there are people who get very comfortable in their jobs, and their jobs become more about them being comfortable than about the mission of the city, which is to improve the lives of its residents.
Right.
A friend of mine is an architect and told me a story about he flew to Denver to help a friend with like a redesign of an office space, and drew up the plans and then brought them to Denver City Hall and for approval by the board or whatever needed to approve it. And he said, I'm going to be back in a couple of weeks. If you guys could just give me a call, I'm flying back to Cleveland tomorrow. And they're like, fly back to Cleveland? Just go get a cup of coffee. We'll have this ready for you in 2 hours.
Wow.
And similarly, I have a friend who went down to the building department, was working on improving his bar, and needed to pull a permit for something, and was standing at the counter, and people were on their computers and all of that, but nobody was coming to the counter, and he's just sort of standing there waiting. And so he picks up his cell phone and dials the number of the building department. He watches somebody answer the phone, say, yes, hello, can I help you? And he's like, yeah, I'm standing at the counter. And that is the sort of thing that can create a sense of drag. I have another story about this. I collect these stories because they're terrifying in some ways.
Right.
Another friend was like, half of our economy, the joke goes, is run on craft beer, right? So a friend of mine started a sort of a brewery tour company.
Right.
And he found out after operating for like 6 or 7 months that he actually needed a permit to be a tour operator in the city of Cleveland. It's like, okay. So and this is a passion project for him. He has a day job. So he takes a day off of work, right? And gets his separate business checkbook together, all of that, goes downtown and has printed out the application for the permit that he needs and everything. And he goes downtown to file it. This should be something, by the way, that you could do online, right?
Right.
So he goes down to file it, and the woman behind the counter tells him, oh, that is the old application. That's no good. And he's like, well, just give me the new one. I'll fill it out real quick. And she's like, the new one's not ready.
Right.
So like that, and if that, there's this sense that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the inside of City Hall that could be harvested to begin to kind of improve, make things move just a little more quickly, more like other cities.
But I actually I'm remembering back to a workshop. This is a church workshop where we were actually talking. It was about misconduct and about the misuse of power, which especially in pastoral relationships, whether it's staff or members of the congregation, we have to be really paying attention to the fact that we are not abusing the trust that is put in us. And I was surprised because you can imagine what this conversation is going to be all about and what misconduct can look like. And the leaders of the workshop basically described that situation of the permits, except it was at the level of church programming, where you came to me and said, I have this great, let's do this. And if I have the power to say, I'm not really going to deal with that today, right? That's power too, right? There is because you have been limited in your ability to put into action what you think could be meaningful to you and to the people who you encounter. So I think that really raises the question for me of power, which is where does it lie, and is it the barriers that these candidates are going to hit when they come in? And I suspect that different candidates, once elected, would hit different barriers, but in some ways, they'll all hit the same ones too. Where will they, where do those barriers exist to them exercising the levers that we need them to as a city? Who holds those cards, so to speak?
So I think there's probably a lot that I don't know, that I don't even know that I don't know about that. But I think based on what I do know, the next mayor's ability to work with city council is really important. and to have a decent working relationship with city council. Not that city council should sign off on everything the mayor wants, but that city council can be an effective partner where that's necessary and effectively hold the mayor's office accountable where that's necessary. Council sort of sits between, in some ways, between the people and the executive.
Okay.
But so having an effective working relationship there, I think, is really important. There has been enough turnover, and there is increasing amounts of turnover in civic areas, in civil society as well, right, which is really helpful, I think, for the next mayor. So there's a new leader at the Greater Cleveland Partnership in Beju Shah, who I think is going to be ready to work with whomever it is. Right. I think there's relatively new leadership at Team Neo and Bill Kaler, but he's eager to build partnerships. There's the county executive, and the ability for the mayor and the county executive to work together is vitally important as well. And then there's the philanthropic sectors, right, in addition to that. And we're going to have new leadership at the Gun Foundation, but the Gun Foundation, Dave Abbott has always been a fantastic kind of partner to most folks. And I suspect that within the next 3 to 5 years, there will be new leadership at the Cleveland Foundation as well. Okay. You know, turnover at Playhouse Square, you've got all sorts of rising leaders. So I think that actually many of the old things that existed are, some of those old barriers have been removed. Okay. And people are eager for new collaborations and new partnerships. That's my hope.
Right. Well, it is what you've described is what I've been learning about as well, that in many ways, just by virtue of timing, and pandemic aside, though that's got to come in too, Cleveland is very much at an inflection point in terms of all the different places where leadership has turned over or is in the process of turning over, and that there's such an opportunity. So can you say a little bit about, I'll name some of these candidates again.
Sure.
What some of these, each of these candidates in particular brings to the conversation. Justin Bibb, Ross DeBello, Bashir Jones, Kevin Kelly, Dennis Kucinich, Zach Reed, and Sandra Williams. Some of those with much greater name recognition than others.
Sure.
Understandably. This is why, again, if one name stands out more to you, check out the forums, spend some time.
Also, we did a 1-hour forum with each of those folks at some point over the last year. Which is not terribly difficult to find on our website. And I interviewed even people, I did all those interviews myself, right, and I interviewed some folks who decided not to run in the end.
Right, and I actually heard a number of those too.
Yeah, like Blaine Griffin, Dick Noth, and others.
Right. Yeah. So there's plenty of information and plenty of ways not only to hear what they have to say, but to hear, firsthand, getting a sense of who they are. Absolutely encourage you to listen to those. So I think, let me start with kind of the obvious candidates, which seem to be like the three or four front runners. Kevin Kelly has been council president for a number of years. He served on council before that. He knows the city really well. And when I think about Council President Kelly, I think that he, while he has stood in the way of some things and some progress that many have wanted, he has also made possible some really important reforms. The right to counsel and housing court being, I think, probably the most important one that he has been a part of. He is, to my mind, he is basically a master of the art of the possible. He's not necessarily a big vision guy, but he knows what he can get done, and he knows what the timing needs to be to get the thing done. And right to counsel, as I said, was a good example of that. And I think that he applied that kind of philosophy to his opposition to the $15 an hour minimum wage inside the city of Cleveland, which is a stance that he has defended a number of times, sort of saying that, it should be $15 an hour, but it needs to be $15 an hour across the county or across the state, not just in Cleveland, because that would be, he believes it would drive business away. Right. I don't know if that's true. Because there's plenty of people paying $15 an hour, like the city club, like the hospitals, and there's a lot of reason to believe that could actually work. But that's not, I can't make that policy. Right. Justin Bibb is another front runner, and he's 34 years old. I think that's the same age that Dennis Kucinich was when he became mayor. How old was Michael White when he became mayor? Also younger, right?
He was younger, but he was more like, I think, 38.
Okay.
Interesting footnote about Mike White, somebody pointed out to me today, because I put it out on Twitter. I'm like, hey, I'm speaking to a group about the mayoral election. What should I tell them? Somebody said the importance of the runoff election. The primary isn't everything. When Mike White ran against George Forbes and made it out of the primary, George Forbes got more votes. George Forbes won the primary, and Mike White was number 2. But Mike White then beat George Forbes in the general election. So just getting the most votes, getting the plurality in the primary is not a guarantee of victory in the general. Justin Bibb, at 34 years old, I think the critique against him is fair. Like, you're young, you haven't ever been in office. Like, why not run for council first or something like that? Learn how this thing works. I will tell you this, 10 years ago, I tried to hire Justin to work on a project when my office was in your commons over here at Civic Commons. We used to rent space from Trinity.
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure.
They used to rent space from Trinity, and I didn't do my research right.
And I didn't move. I met him, and I was like, oh my! I was in Dewey's Coffee. I met him in Dewey's Coffee on Shaker Square, and I was like, this kid's amazing. And he was, 24 at the time. I was like, I got to figure out a way to work with this kid. And before I could make him a job offer, Ed Fitzgerald had made him a job offer, and he went to work at the county. So he's worked in public service, and he served on the RTA board, and he knows how these machines, how these budgets work. He doesn't know them as well as somebody like Kevin Kelly, but he's also very bright. He went to Case Western Reserve University and got his JD and his MBA simultaneously. And he went to work for Gallup and doing, consulting across the country. So, and his consulting was specifically focused on cities and how cities can work better. So I think he actually, he's a student of this stuff. So, and he also, he's inspired, he's created a really strong campaign organization, probably the strongest campaign organization of any of the candidates. And he has inspired and I think engaged a lot of people with his vision and his ability to kind of bridge different parts of the community, different communities across our city. So I think he brings a lot of that kind of youthful promise and potential. Right. Somebody said to me that with Kevin starts at like a higher floor, and his ceiling is somewhere around here, and while Justin starts much lower, his potential is much higher if you compare the two. That was what was shared with me. Dennis Kucinich is obviously a known quantity, and he had 2 years in the mayor's office already, so he kind of has an understanding of how the mayor's office and city hall and the city functioned in the 1970s. He spent a considerable amount of time in Congress, and he knows how to campaign. Right. And his signs have never changed in 4 decades. They're just yellow, and they say Dennis with an exclamation point, and it's an all-purpose sign.
Does he have a stock of them that he's able to
I don't know.
use?
They changed a little bit. It now says Dennis, exclamation point for mayor.
So frugality is...
Yeah. When we interviewed him, right, he would not sit for an interview with us until he announced.
Okay.
Everybody else was willing to do it before they announced or whenever, and that was fine. When he sat for our interview, I asked him the same question I'd asked other older white males who were considering running, why on earth does our city need an old white male in this role right now? And he said, Dan, I've never felt more healthy. I'm the healthiest I've ever been. Do you play basketball? We can play one-on-one. I was like,
seems like something is missing from that response.
Yeah, and I said, no, sir, I don't play basketball, and I wouldn't accept that challenge. And he's like, well, I'll take on any of the other candidates. And Justin said, sure, I'm ready, and tried to arrange it as an event to raise funds for the Boys and Girls Club, but he could never get Congressman Kucinich to the court. A few weeks ago, it was revealed that the congressman was not vaccinated, and because of an apparent underlying health condition. So I believe he did not tell the whole truth when I was interviewing him. He also got very mad at me for bringing up his relationship with the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. Okay. So So that's the kind of, but these are all known things about Congressman Kucinich. Sandra Williams is really interesting. She could become the first black woman to lead the city of Cleveland. And she certainly knows what she brings is an experience with state government that none of the other candidates has, and the ability to really partner well with state government to bring more investment from state government back to the city. She has her connection to House Bill 6, the bailout for First Energy, and all of that is probably her Achilles heel, I would say, in all of that. Zach Reed he learned city politics under Mayor Willie Brown of San Francisco. And he really knows politics. He knows how to get people together and push things forward. And he served on city council for a number of years as well. So I mean, he has some capabilities that would certainly be assets in the office. Bashir Jones is kind of young, like Justin Bibb. If he were elected, he'd be the first Muslim in office. And he is an incredible public speaker. He would bring that kind of bully pulpit sort of thing that has been lacking in recent years. Ross DeBello, I don't believe, having interviewed him and engaged with him, I think Ross is as surprised as anyone by the fact that he's still in the race. He's a great guy. He's got some great ideas, and but he's really focused on like a couple of really specific issues around campaign finance and getting money out of politics, which I've pointed out to him. I think might be better suited for a different venue, like city council, a place where you can actually legislate.
I often wonder in those situations where folks clearly have drive around an issue that is unlikely to be unifying the whole community, are they really intending to run for mayor, or are they trying to get ideas into the fray?
He's a candidate who's trying to get ideas into the race.
Right.
And did I mention all 7?
Well, since I have the notes, you did very nicely done.
Okay.
Well done.
I do want to point out there was an 8th candidate who barely missed getting onto the ballot, Landry Simmons. I don't know anything about him other than that he missed getting on the ballot by fewer than 10 signatures, I think, or 14 signatures or something. And that just speaks to the importance of, from the candidate side and the campaign side, the importance of your ground game and like doing what you need to do. But it also speaks to the importance of voting and engagement and signing petitions and getting involved. The Bashir Jones, our councilman who's running, councilman from the Huff neighborhood, from Ward 7, I believe, he won his last race, he won election by just 8 votes.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And he narrowly made it onto the ballot by a similarly very tiny number of valid signatures. Like the threshold was 3,000 and he had 3,000 and something under 20.
And so I have one follow-up question, then we'll turn to our congregation for questions. Is it surprising to you that there is no clear, there's a few sort of towards the top, but this really could go in almost any direction?
Yeah, it's not surprising to me actually that there's no clear front runner, because I think if the pool of candidates was smaller, I think there might be. When Congressman Kucinich got in, that really split things because he has such a strong base, and so I think all the polls that I've seen have put him actually on top.
Right.
But I don't. But again, the general election, like that may be where he gets in the primary, but he may have a ceiling in terms of the number of votes he can actually attract overall.
We will have 3 candidates emerge from the primary?
Just 2.
Just 2, okay.
Just 2, yeah. One of the questions that you had asked me prior to this was like, what can this congregation do in terms of engagement with Cleveland when the congregation is largely lives outside of Cleveland?
About 2/3, I think.
Yeah. The work of the GCC is hugely important, and GCC is working with Cleveland Votes and other entities figure out strategies for voter engagement. Voter engagement in Cleveland is abysmal. Yeah. It's so bad. And so really anything you can do to help people register to vote, to be involved in other efforts to encourage people to actually vote once they are registered is massively important. We've had really the low voter turnout is super depressing, and that's a whole other topic for conversation.
Right, especially given the need.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the moment.
Yeah.
And it really is something that we want to do anything we can to try to reverse and turn around. Mm-hmm. So I want to give us a chance to, if anyone has questions, Daryl is also watching online. So if you're watching us online, if you have a question, go ahead and put it into the comment, and Daryl Lauschie is paying attention to that and can bring it to us if there is one. But we have a few minutes. Does anyone have a question they'd like to come forward? Tony, Scott, can you bring the microphone? Can you travel with the mic?
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
My concern about this election and the number of people running is that it highlights a lack of Cleveland leadership looking to the future. I think that Frank Jackson knew he wasn't going to run before 6 months ago. And yet it seems like everybody was kind of scrambling once he said, no, I'm not going to run. And there was no clear focus among the leadership of Cleveland of where should we be going. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think that's actually, your question is one of the reasons why I wasn't surprised, and I'm not surprised by the fact that there's no clear front runner, was because the mayor, neither the mayor nor the county party nor the county executive have done anything in particular to kind of create a pipeline, a leadership pipeline. Succession planning, all of that. And in a democracy, you really don't want them to do too much of that, but you want there to be enough of that so you feel like there's some mentorship happening and some people who you could look at and say, that person is ready for the job, that person could definitely do it.
Well, leadership cultivation doesn't necessarily mean building a machine.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
It doesn't have to be that.
That's right. And I think that you have seen that the same is true across a lot of areas in our community. It was not immediately clear who should lead the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, and so forth. And there are these kinds of processes that happen that, that you do kind of wonder a little bit why there hasn't been more leadership development. A few years ago, Randy McShepard spoke at the City Club and really focused on that specifically and the lack of that that he saw, that there wasn't, sort of going back to the George Forbes, Arnold Pinckney era, there wasn't a whole lot of let's bring up this next, kind of cohort of future leaders. Right. And people have really been holding on to power. And some people have said that, the Kucinich campaign is kind of an example of like the older generation still holding on to power. I don't know that Kucinich really represents that older generation. It's like really a Kucinich specific thing. But I think that question is very insightful. We haven't, as a community, and during these last 16 years, people were very content to allow the mayor to be the mayor and to not create this sort of broader set of potential future leaders. What's happened, though, what's really cool to see is how many people are running for council right now. And there are some incumbent council members who many people feel are doing a great job. But the race, such as it is, has opened up some seats in Kevin Kelly's ward and Bashir Jones's ward. So, and then a lot of other people are like, wow, this is our moment. So you see people running against Kerry McCormick. You see people running against Tony Brancatelli. And this is frankly exciting.
Right.
Somebody said to me about Justin Bibb and Kevin Kelly, like, this guy was so mad because Kevin Kelly, like, Bibb is stealing Kevin Kelly's votes. I was like, well, but that's what it's all about, right? It is literally a zero-sum game, and that's how you win an election. You steal votes from somebody else. But there was that sense of, like, because Kevin was council president, he was somehow entitled to be the next mayor. And you don't, and I think George Forbes had made the same mistake when he was council president, and then Mike White came in. So, no, it's a democracy. But in all seriousness, whoever the next mayor is going to need all of our help. He's going to need help from all of us to be successful. He's going to need to sit in this chair.
Or she.
He or she is going to need to sit in this chair and talk with you and talk with your community and do the same in every church in town, right? And do the same at the city club. And, you know, they're going to need our help to shape the vision, to execute on the vision. They cannot do it alone.
Right.
Thank you for your question. One in the back.
It seems to me that there should be some relationship between poverty in the city and this low voter interest that you called abysmal.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear what you're saying.
It seems to me that there should be that there is a relationship between the poverty in the city and the low voter interest.
The turnout, voter engagement.
Can you talk about that? And is that why maybe there hasn't been good leadership for a long time?
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation there, and I'm not a political scientist. I haven't looked at the data to see how that's connected here in Cleveland or across other cities. But I think it's a fair assessment and a fair point to make that there very well could be a connection there. Certainly, if you just think about the logistics of life, being poor, it's much harder to get to the polls to even care about what's on the ballot or that there is a ballot. And there's certainly been a sense that has been articulated again and again that it does not matter. There's a lot of people, particularly in these areas where there's low voter turnout, who just simply believe that it does not matter. Policy Matters Ohio is working with Cleveland Votes they've done this survey and they're crunching the numbers on it, and they should have some results about this soon that will actually, hopefully it's going to identify exactly what the driving factors are for low voter turnout. I'd be shocked if poverty wasn't one of them.
Right. I think our next question comes from our online audience.
So pumped about the online audience. Thank you. I don't believe there is a plan for term limits. And, Don Plusquellic in Akron, Ohio, was mayor for like 28 years, I think. And he got super bitter by the end. So I think that in Cleveland history, Tom L. Johnson actually served for 6 terms. The terms were just 2-year terms at the time, 1900 and 1912. So he was actually reelected more than Frank Jackson. But didn't serve quite as long. But I do not think there's any movement towards term limits. The term limit thing is so interesting because you trade institutional knowledge and institutional history for fresh blood and fresh perspective, and that hasn't always worked out as well as you might think or you might want it to, because it turns out that people who don't know what they don't know aren't always good at the thing that they don't know how to do.
And is Cleveland, and then we'll go to Andrew, unless the person who's been elected is flat out not working out, do we tend to stick with the horse that we have for long periods of time?
Yeah, I don't think there's much of a history of recalls. I think that Congressman Kucinich, when he was mayor, we had 2-year terms for the mayor up until then, right? So up until like roughly until Voinovich, I think, or something like that.
Right.
So I think that the 2-year term, was never a reason. It'd be impossible to organize a recall within like 2 years.
Right. Just wait till the election.
Just wait till the election.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, slow walk the policies, wait till the election. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Andrew, do we have?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So I feel like during this election, there has been a great divide between people who believe that the answer is having someone who with a lot of experience in politics, in government, to help lead us out of the pandemic, the racial crises that we are experiencing. But then there's the other side that really believes we need someone fresh, someone new, someone with bold visions, but maybe less political experience, less quote-unquote corruption. But what specifically does experience bring to the table in advantages and disadvantages? And what specifically do the fresh, new ideas and less experience, but more or less rust from political experience bring to the table?
That's the crux of the challenge, isn't it, for voters to figure out. Experience. So City Hall and creating policy, implementing policy, getting something actually done there's an art to urban politics that is incredibly important. And it's not just about how City Hall works, but like how you build coalitions across a community. I would recommend anybody who hasn't read The Power Broker by Robert Moses should read The Power Broker by Robert Moses. It's about Robert Moses. It was written by Robert Caro. Robert Moses was an incredibly important, never elected political animal in New York City in the early part of the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, probably the most important person.
Largely shaped what New York is like. If you're driving across the Triborough Bridge, that's because of what Moses did, but never elected.
Exactly, but never elected. And it's those people who aren't elected who can have an extraordinary amount of power. Freddie Collier, for instance, is our city planning director. Extraordinarily important position, unelected position. Freddie does a great job. So experience is about understanding the levers that you were referring to, understanding how to build coalitions, understanding how, when things need to be when you need to convene the back room so that you can organize the public thing. That there are multiple layers to every bit of progress that happens. Vision is hugely important too, and the argument could be made that we've had a lot of experience in office these last 16 years between Marty Sweeney at council president and Kevin Kelly at council president and Mayor Frank Jackson. We've had a lot of experience behind the wheel. But we haven't necessarily had big, bold, new ideas. And so the argument is then new ideas. What are other cities doing? Frank Jackson, for all the great things that he's done, is not somebody who traveled to a lot of other cities and said, I like that, I like that, I like that, let's make that happen here, right? He is a creature of Cleveland. He is proud of being a creature of Cleveland. And he is not somebody who sees that there's a whole lot to learn or be gained by importing ideas from outside. And that can have a stultifying effect on a community. Another candidate, or somebody who brings in, who has experience in other cities, who has seen how other cities are able to partner with their higher ed institutions to advance a sector of the economy or to leverage certain partnerships, that there's a lot of possibility there that we just haven't seen in a very long time. Right. Does that answer your question?
Do you mean that there's a lot of possibility in the sense that the raw materials are there, it's a matter of how those things are all leveraged, or is it, okay?
Yeah. We have an incredible city.
Yeah, we do.
Incredible city. Look at the city that built this beautiful cathedral, the city that saved Playhouse Square, the city that rebuilt Public Square, the city that sits on 20% on the shores of 20% of the Earth's fresh water. The city that has three professional sports teams, and really
what time is it? How long do we have until 4:30?
I know, right? Go Browns. And so we have so much potential here, but it does sometimes feel as though we are one of these weird head-scratching situations where the sum is the whole is actually less than the sum of the parts.
Well, I think that's why this is such an important conversation, and because I think it is an inflection point. I think just by virtue, there's a transition that's happening, and it's a normal and natural one, but amidst so many other things that are going through those transitions.
I want to point one other thing out, just to come back to your question for a second about leadership development. A great example of this was last year did you know that we had a county prosecutor's race last year? No? You didn't know? Maybe you did? So there was one candidate, the incumbent, Mike O'Malley. Now, criminal justice reform is the most important issue of the last year, of 2020. The most important issue. And there was no candidate running against Mike O'Malley. Mike O'Malley has been involved in the prosecutor's office for most of his career, having worked under Bill Mason, and then went into private practice, and then came back to win against whoever he won against, whose name escapes me right now, Tim McGinty. And meanwhile, across the country, you've got fully 30 to 35% of prosecutors who are elected to their offices would describe themselves as progressive prosecutors. Prosecutors who are using the office and remaking their offices to create a new vision of criminal justice reform, to not just create a vision, but to actually implement a new vision for criminal justice reform. Nobody ran against Mike O'Malley last year. That is a leadership problem. In a city that is full of lawyers. We probably have more lawyers per capita than DC.
Is that inertia, or is there reason not to get into the mix?
Oh, nobody wants to run in our county Democratic Party, which kind of controls a lot of politics, is not as interested in creating new leaders and new potential as it is in kind of ensuring that people get reelected. And spending as little money as possible to ensure that they get reelected. That's how it appears to me as somebody from the outside. And so there's a certain amount of inertia, and there's a certain amount of if I'm a young lawyer who really believes in something, how could I possibly win against an incumbent politician with an Irish last name?
One more question.
This is super fun, by the way.
Good. Well, I hear murmuring, and as Episcopalians, we don't murmur from the pews that often. So obviously, we've touched a nerve, and that's good.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure this is a question you can answer or want to answer. But the police unions.
Yes.
My recollection is that when Jane Campbell took office, she was warned, if you take on the police hierarchy and unions, you're sunk. And she was sunk by a lot of things, and I'm wondering if that is still current truth, that the police, from a perspective outside, it seems the police unions hold enormous power, and I'm just wondering if that force is still one that every candidate has to reckon with in one way or the other.
That is a great question, and I will answer it to the best of my ability. That I believe that the campaign, the broad campaign with its focus on public safety is certainly behaving as if the police union is still as powerful as it once was. I do not believe the police union is as powerful as it once was. I think the calls for criminal justice reform and the case for criminal justice reform and the challenge, the problems with the police union or the police itself and the ways in which union leadership have defended the officers who killed Tamir Rice and killed Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams. I think that they've lost a lot of credibility. I also think that the police union used to be this sort of monolithic white thing, right? And now you have the Black Shield, which is the black police officers or guild, essentially, that doesn't always line up alongside the Cleveland Patrolmen's Association, the CPA. And so I think that they want to be as important and as crucial as they have been in the past. And I think that's why you see Congressman Kucinich and others promising to hire 400 police officers, which frankly is an impossibility. They couldn't hire 400 new police officers in 4 years. And also, I think not what our community needs. We have a diminished population. So I do think that's a factor. I think that the next mayor will have to deal with the police and with structural reform inside the police department. and we'll have, and whether with or without the consent decree and whatever that process is, there has to be some structural change there. But I'm hopeful that the police union will be less of a factor, because I don't think that's good for the community when the police hold that much power. Thank you so much for that question.
Good question. Question off of the topic of the mayor election.
Okay.
Here you're at the Trinity Forum.
We're at the
You're
Trinity Forum.
accustomed to running the city.
Seated next to two potted
next to
palms.
the potted plants. We don't have ferns. We have palms to be a little bit more on brand.
Yeah.
Tell me what you do to prepare for your interviews for your forums.
It really depends. You know, if it's a book, it's easy, right? I just
Right,
read the
read the
book
book,
and I
take
read
notes.
everything that I can find that's been written about the book. Generally, though, I mean, when I'm doing interviews, I try to think of myself as a proxy for the listener. And while I will prepare a bunch of questions and topic areas I want to pursue, and I tell everybody who I train a lot of students to do moderation and things like that in our Youth Forum Council. And I tell them, like, your list of questions is not a checklist. It's a safety net. The most important thing is to listen closely and think and ask yourself, like, you know, and pay attention and ask yourself always, like, if I'm in the audience, what am I thinking right now? What's the question that I want to ask? And the best feedback that I ever got and that I continue to get from people who listen to interviews that I've done is you ask the question that I was thinking at the same time that I was thinking it, which means that I'm like very much in the moment. So, yeah. Good.
Well, Dan, thank you very much for spending Sunday with us.
Very Reverend BJ, thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate not only the depth in looking at the candidates and in the election, but also the nuance. There's so much story to this, and I appreciate certainly your enthusiasm for where we are. But thanks so much for your time and for giving us so much background on this.
Thank you very much for having me. It's super exciting. Thanks all.
And if you're joining us online, we thank you for being with us and as a part of this. If you are viewing this either Sunday afternoon or Monday or even sometime Tuesday, please, by all means, go out, vote, do what you can to help other people get to the polls. And thanks for being a part of this. Blessings to each and every one of you, and thank you for being a part of the Trinity Forum.